Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I've got T J Huizar here again. He talked to us previously about his language learning methods. He's a young polyglot who's already studied 14 languages. Welcome back to the channel, TJ.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about another aspect of your language learning, which is the whole multicultural travel, documentary filmmaking dimension, which seems to me to be a big driver for you in your passion for languages. What about your family background, first of all? Because you're in Arizona, it's an area of Spanish influence, I suppose. What's the story?
So my parents were both born in California, one in the Central Valley, one in Los Angeles. My dad is Hispanic ancestry. He speaks Spanish, actually. He picked it up as a kid. And then my mother is African American. So they both met here, actually, after living in California. And we've traveled a lot as a family. And it wasn't until, I talked a lot as a kid about Spanish culture, about African American culture, and over time, just having that perspective on life of those multiple perspectives on life, I was able to understand the world more, and that kind of gave me some eyes to travel.
But you weren't speaking with your father in Spanish then?
Not necessarily. He did teach us a lot of vocabulary, and I did understand quite a bit as a kid, but because I live in Arizona, the part of Arizona where Spanish isn't spoken that much, I didn't really use it on a day-to-day basis, and it wasn't until I was around 12 that I started to seriously study it, and since then I just study it every now and then. And it's part of my heritage, so it's quite a powerful language for me.
And what about on your mum's side? Are there heritage languages there somewhere in the background?
I would say there's not very much heritage. There's not very many languages. She did go to Kenya on a mission trip for a few months. She studied a bit of Swahili, and that's quite interesting, I would say. But we do have a dialect here in America. It's like a vernacular dialect, and I do speak that with my cousins, and it's quite interesting because the African American dialect of English, you can't really some kids at my high school and stuff like that, they don't really understand it, and so I guess that creates quite a unique cultural identity as well.
I think people often don't understand that dialects have their own grammars as well, that it's not,
exactly.
You know,
conjugation, all that.
That's it. So, you know, and they are really in many ways of equal status. Just because they're not written, there's not newspapers in them, but what might be thought of as mistakes are actually not, if you understand the system. Languages are always sort of systems within themselves almost. Aren't they? So what about in your school then, school subjects? Which languages did you have on the curriculum, or do you have on the curriculum?
So I've studied French at school for about 4 years, I would say. I've gotten quite good at French, quite proficient. Luckily this year I've invested a lot in my accent. I studied Mandarin Chinese last year, and I took the second level after not even studying because I just wanted to learn as much as possible, not really waste any time, and that really helped with writing. But in high school, I've only studied those two languages. Middle school, I did do Latin for 2 years as a prerequisite, essentially, for French, and over time, I would say that French has been the most beneficial class I've taken in school because I actually have gained quite a level of proficiency just from school and, of course, studying myself.
And do your school friends, contemporaries, think you're a bit weird then for having this interest in languages?
Not necessarily, because once I have a conversation with them about why I do it and they see my films, things like that, they begin to understand that it's much more than just a nerdy kid trying to study Japanese or something like that. There's a stereotype of being obsessed with cultures and things like that. But I would say that after they get to know me, they understand that I'm much more interested in the personal aspect and the storytelling aspect of speaking these languages. So it's not just wanting to move somewhere, something superficial like that.
Your first trip, I think, when you started to learn a language was to China. When was that, and why were you traveling to China? Where did you go in China?
So I started with choir that same year, and my mom actually forced me to go into it, and I didn't really want to do it, but it was probably one of the best decisions of my life because my choir director announced that the Chinese government had funded us to go to China. They paid for our hotels, travel, other accommodation and trains and things like that. And I didn't know anything about China, and I was honestly quite disgusted because all I've heard in America is that China is this undeveloped and backwards society, things that are nasty to hear. But after going, I realized that this place was industrial, it was cultural, it was everything that I loved about foreign culture. And up until then, I didn't really understand that the world is bigger than just the United States. And I met a girl named Lucy in China, and I was able to speak Chinese, and eventually I just fell in love with traveling and understanding more about humanity in a sense.
And it's really exciting, isn't it, when you first arrive in a country and you've learned a bit of the language, and even though there's a lot going over your head, you suddenly realize, hey, this really exists almost, and it really does work, however stumbling and frustrating. You can dive in and start using the preparation that you've done before your trip.
Yeah, I actually remember the first time I knew that I could say I spoke Chinese was when we were in an airport and we were all getting McDonald's. And I was able to translate the orders for the lady because she didn't speak English. And they even gave me a free Happy Meal because I was translating for about 30 minutes. And that was one of the most amazing experiences, that click that you spoke a foreign language. It was quite inspiring for me as well.
Another trip that you've done after that, and this is how I found you on YouTube, and brings together now maybe your filmmaking experience so far and plans. You learned some Russian to go to the Caucasus, to Georgia, to Armenia, and to Azerbaijan. And you were also interested in getting to the border or near to Iran in Armenia, because you'd learned some Persian. So what was the linguistic background with those two languages first before you? Was that in preparation for this trip, which was last summer, I think, yeah?
Yeah, it was last October, yeah, around that time. And Persian, I actually had been studying for 2 years around. One of my best friends is Persian, and I've gone to Persian parties with him. Tehrangeles, a Iranian district in Los Angeles. So the Persian culture was something really special to me, Persian music, and I really just deeply love Persian culture. And obviously it's very difficult for Americans to go to Iran. You need to go to Washington, D.C., to go to the Pakistani embassy, get visas, all kinds of bureaucracy. And I wanted to just be able to see Iran. So that was a sort of subplot in that documentary. And then for Russian, I studied it for that trip because I thought it would be too difficult to study Georgian, Armenian, and Azeri because they're all from 3 different language groups. And Russian is the lingua franca in the region, so I saw it as a language that was useful and would help me film my documentaries. And I would say about 80% of everyone spoke Russian, so that was quite a good investment.
And so in that film, which is called Indigenous, and I'll link folks underneath to the film here on YouTube, we see you arriving, first of all, I think, into Georgia, and you are then traveling through, you go then to Armenia, and you go to Azerbaijan, and then I think you return to Georgia. But you were searching out other languages as well.
Yeah, so something this project I'm trying to do, this Indigenous series essentially, is where I go to different parts of the world and I try to search for these languages. And this was only my first one essentially, but what I did was I went to Caucasia. I didn't really know anything about it. And I went to these villages and searched for the Pontic Greek dialect, which was considered moribund in Armenia. The Aramaic language, it didn't actually make it into the film because the microphone was broken, but I also encountered them. And even the Persian language in southern Armenia, I tried to find it. It was too difficult. Same with the Ossetian language in Georgia. I got caught by the Russian guards because they pushed their border forward essentially, where the village was supposed to be part of Georgia. And that was my first trip in a series of many that I planned to do. And it was really amazing because it was this new style of travel that I love. I got to combine my ability to storytell and make documentaries with language learning, with my passion for travel, of course.
And you took a friend with you to act as your cameraman. How did you find the presence of the camera got in the way in meeting people?
Luckily, in that region of the world, people are not camera shy at all. In fact, many people wanted to be on camera, and that's different from region to region. Places like West Africa, that would be very difficult. They're not very comfortable with cameras. But I found that we also had to do a lot of camera hiding in some parts, like when I was at the border. And I think just having techniques to film without invading the privacy of others or making it feel uncomfortable, like having smaller cameras and not having too much gear, I would say, is probably ideal in that situation.
And I suppose that you had a plan of where you wanted to go and what you were looking for. But then when it came to assembling, to the editing stage and to the scripting stage, it partly depended on what had actually happened on the ground. And you mentioned one or two glitches, things you didn't manage to film, or the sound wasn't working. But then there were occasions as well which you couldn't probably have predicted, where you were invited into people's houses and shown hospitality.
Yeah, I essentially wrote many scenarios down of what could happen, and I wrote voiceovers for them or questions I would want to ask in that situation. And only about 20% of them came into fruition, but I really like the spontaneous aspect of the trip because it feels more raw and more authentic, I would say. So planning, it can only get you so far in this process of filming a documentary, but I really think that just having a simple conversation and knowing what you want to discuss is all you really need, and having a plan, of course.
And finding that the language then is a way to open people up almost, I suppose. You're showing an interest in something. I think of the scene when you're talking to the grandmother who knows some Pontic Greek, yeah, where you're actually talking about something probably that most people in her life have not shown much interest in, but which might go to the very core of her being. So it could be quite an emotional thing.
Yeah, when I was talking to her, I asked her to tell a story about the Greek people, and I didn't know at the time, but she had hardships because her family had moved to Greece, her sons had moved to Russia, and they passed away, and she was essentially left alone in that village, and I actually didn't know what she was saying at the time because she only spoke Greek and Armenian, and her son only spoke Russian and Armenian, so they had to translate. But luckily, I found someone on Instagram that spoke Pontic, and they translated it for me, and I was able to understand the true story of why she was crying and why she was in so much pain. And being able to watch it back with the subtitles was a heartbreaking experience, but also uplifting because I got to share that story to the world.
Was the atmosphere in the three Caucasian countries quite similar, or did they feel in general as you were traveling through them sort of completely different places?
I felt as if they were on three different continents almost. You had Georgia, it was this green, lush, Swiss-like European country. It had European culture, and it overall felt like it was part of continental Europe. And then you had Armenia, which felt like it was something from just ancient times, perhaps the Levant, something like that. And it was a very simple and very traditional country. And then you had Azerbaijan, which was a lot like the Gulf states. It had a lot of oil money, so there were many skyscrapers, and it was generally just a very rich and abundant place. And of course, I'd love to go back. It was a really beautiful and very Islamic influenced society.
And that oil history, of course, goes back quite a long way, because even in Tsarist times before the Russian Revolution, the oil industry was taking off there. So I imagine there are quite a few old-style imperial pre-First World War buildings there still
way
as
back
well.
In 1909, it was,
Yeah.
you could see all this ancient. The cool thing about Baku is that there's a mixture of this old Soviet architecture, but also there's this modern curved and chic architecture. There's one building by Zaha Hadid named the Heinar Aliyev Center, I believe, and that was really beautiful. I got to go there at sunset. It was like the perfect end to my Azerbaijani experience.
I thought that looked like her work. It's so recognizable, and you didn't actually say that in the film, but you do enthuse a lot about the architecture there. And certainly I'm very envious. I've wanted to go to the Caucasus for a long time. When I was living in Moscow up to 2009, relations were very frosty between Moscow and Georgia, so it wasn't actually possible to fly directly. So I still haven't made it to Georgia, but I would love to visit them.
It's beautiful.
So your film making career then has taken you also to Spain and Portugal, where you showed an interest in the languages, and you've done a couple of shorter vlog style films on those as well.
Yeah, that was probably my first experiment trying to filmmake. That was also with my choir. I traveled around the Iberian Peninsula, and we got to see the north, which was very beautiful, and it was a quite unique experience that a lot of people tend to miss out on when they go to Spain. And Portugal was very beautiful, very humble atmosphere. And then I also got to visit the south, which was very Islamic influenced, and that was another beautiful region. So Iberia in general was very beautiful, and I want to go back to search for these languages that I mentioned, but because I was on a choir tour, I obviously couldn't go out and search for them. So Iberia is a very linguistically diverse region in Europe, and I would love to go back anytime to make a film about them.
Yeah, I, as a long-term Basque learner, was pleased to see you give Basque its due in your vlog from northern Spain. And then when you went to Portugal, you remarked that it's really quite different from Spain, isn't it? And that struck me too. I'd actually been to Brazil a couple of times before I ever went to Portugal. And I realized they, for all the differences, tropical Brazil, Atlantic Portugal, actually there's more similarity because of the shared heritage and the architecture and even the commercial stores and the chains, aside from the language, between those two. There's almost more similarity than there is between Portugal and Spain.
Exactly. I would say there's a lot of hills in both parts. They're very, the atmospheres are similar, I would assume. I've never been to Brazil, but I kind of know how it's like. The traditions are very similar. And Portugal, it's a very unique place in Europe, and it's one of my favorite countries there too, because it's like this San Francisco, very hilly, very traditional, and the cuisine is also very different than Spain. You have soups and bacalhau, a lot of potatoes, and you feel like you're in the new world essentially, where places like Mexico and Latin America, because the architecture is a lot older and a lot more European style than a lot of Spain, because Spain has many different types. You have the Basque architecture, you have Islamic architecture in the south, like I said. So going to Portugal, it's a lot more of a traditional European experience, I would say. It's very traditional.
Which of the two languages, Portuguese and Spanish, comes easiest to you? I suppose Spanish because of your background.
Definitely. Spanish is one of my better languages, actually, especially when it comes to speaking, because I've been able to use it a lot more since I only live about 4 hours from the Mexican border. And Portuguese, I studied it for that trip, but I didn't really have a good accent back then. And recently, a month ago about, I started getting better at my Portuguese accent. And I would love to learn the Brazilian accent as well for whenever I go there. So Spanish, I would say.
One of your most striking videos so far, TJ, is the one about the Navajo people and their language. That is a Native American group, I think, who live quite close to you in Arizona. Could you explain a bit about who they are,
Yeah.
their language and culture, and then we can talk maybe a bit about the film itself?
Yeah, so the Navajo people, it's the largest indigenous group in the United States. And it's funny because they live so close to me, I've never been. And I wanted to learn more about them. And on that trip, I learned about their history as code talkers during World War II, because their language wasn't really known to the outside world, especially to the Japanese. In the Pacific Theater during World War II, they could use it as a sort of code to transmit messages. And I got to meet a code talker. And unfortunately, these days, a lot of them are passing away because it was such a long time ago. So being able to meet one of them is quite a rare experience. And you also have a lot of beautiful nature. You have Monument Valley, which is very known in the for its Wild West flicks and cowboys and John Wayne, things like that. And just the Navajo Nation in general. It's almost like it's a country within the United States. They have their own culture, their own customs, their own flag, of course. And the cuisine is even different. They have a lot of bread, beans, things that are not really found in traditional American cuisine.
And I gather there's maybe 150,000 people, slightly more, slightly less, who still speak the language. So I suppose it's one of these, you say, the stronger Native American cultures. Did you hear many people, because you went, there's a reservation, how far, how many hours drive is it away from you? You know, did you hear how far is it, did you hear people speaking the language?
So I went on my birthday weekend, and I went for 3 days. I pretty much encompassed the whole thing. It's about the size of, I would say, the United Kingdom, probably just England. And it's the capital is named Window Rock, and it's right between the Arizona-New Mexico border. And starting there, they have a Navajo museum, and the culture is pretty thriving there. The signs are actually in Navajo for the stop signs and street signs, and that was really exciting for me. And then you have, if you go up north, you have Monument Valley, and the natives there still speak Navajo. And of course, everyone is fluent in English on the Navajo Nation, but I was really excited when the tour guide for Monument Valleys, we went at sunrise. So he toured us around essentially, and I got to hear the Navajo language, and both the tour guides spoke it with each other, and it was quite a beautiful experience to hear that Navajo language at sunrise, just in Monument Valley, and that was an amazing, amazing experience. And it felt like I was in a different continent, and I was only 4 hours away from home.
And do you think that younger people are using the language as well?
I would say because the prestige of English these days, a lot of kids are starting to drop the Navajo language, which is quite sad. But there's actually revival efforts going on right now. They're dubbing films like Finding Nemo and Star Wars in the Navajo language. Disney was partnering with them. And they have a Rosetta Stone for Navajo. They're creating all of these new technologies. They're trying to combine modern technology with this traditional Navajo language to inspire the kids to learn more about it. And I really love that it's somewhat making a revival in prestige, because it was somewhat frowned upon by American society for a while, and now it's being more and more appreciated because it's such a unique and so beautiful language, very beautiful language.
And it's on Duolingo as well, isn't it? As
Yeah,
one of their lesser used language. Did you try and learn any yourself?
Navajo, I do have a few resources on it, but the verb system in the language is very, very difficult to wrap your mind around. And I don't really have enough proper resources to study the language, but it's definitely still on my list. I'm going to try to go back to the Navajo Nation eventually, and hopefully by then I'll be able to speak the language conversationally, because it's quite important as an Arizonian to somewhat speak our native language. We obviously have many tribes, but that one is my favorite, and it's the most useful native language to learn where I live.
I saw that your film Indigenous has been accepted into a film festival this year. So congratulations on that. But that's also a festival that's put on by another minority or Indigenous group, I think.
That's true. It was like an Indigenous film festival, so having Indigenous play at Indigenous is quite suiting. And yeah, they had to postpone it, obviously. So I believe it's in November now, and it's in Los Angeles. So I think I might be able to visit now, because it was going to be at the same time as the Polyglot Conference. So I'm excited to see how that unfolds, and showing my film to more people. And of course, making more films between now and then.
When you've shot all your footage, I don't know, did you shoot the Navajo one yourself, or was there a cameraman there with you?
I would say most of my films, if not all of them, besides my Indigenous one, I filmed, edited all by myself, because it's more of a personal hobby, I would say, to just make these films. Obviously, my dad goes with me on a lot of my trips, and he helps me out every now and then to film me. But the editing process, the filming process, scripting, research, it's usually done by me. And I have about 4 friends that help me with the project and the Planet Project, and they help me with research. And later on down the road, we're gonna do more projects together, and we're gonna split up the research filming to make it a quicker process to make these films, because that one, the Indigenous film, took about a year to make, between research, scripting, filming, and editing.
Do you find you're a natural writer with scripting? I think your scripts they're very authoritative, and extremely sympathetic, but there's almost a lyrical quality to them at times as well.
Yeah, my friends do make fun of me for how poetic they can be, so I try to make sure it's not too classical in a sense. So I've sort of mixed the storytelling aspects with a more casual register, so it sounds like it's more of a personal, like you're personally viewing it, because I don't want it to sound too posh or too high of a register in a sense. I want it to sound like you're listening to it with friends, something like that.
So coming back down to earth then, to friends, you mentioned you've got a Persian friend who's introduced you to Persian culture, provided some social context, some community there for you. But I think you've used other languages you've learned, like Polish as well, and Spanish with your schoolmates.
Yeah, I actually have, luckily, where I live, there's so many different races that I have at least one friend for each language almost. My three of my best friends, one is a speaker of the Hindi language, one speaks Slovak, and one speaks Persian fluently. So those are all three languages that I always am able to practice. And we've all been able to travel together too. And that's quite a blessing to be able to immerse myself with their families while I was traveling. And also just to understand more about their way of life on the other side of the ocean or something like that.
And I suppose that's what you're looking forward to doing in years to come, TJ. Now, you're still at high school at the moment. So what's the next step for you, both in your education or your career, and then creatively as well?
So over the course of the next 2 years, I have a lot of plans to create more films. I am going to do one this year because I had plans to do 2 or 3 this year, but that's probably not going to happen now. So one in October, hopefully the Philippines, and then I have one in spring next year, and after that I'll do them very rapidly. And when I graduate, my Slovak friend and I were going to do this Asia trip to make more of these films, and they're all going to follow this basic plot of searching for a language in each episode, a lost language or a moribund language. And I hope that gains some traction, some attention by the general public. And after that trip, I'm going to go to college, university for a few years, and hopefully keep doing these films while I'm studying. And I'm not really sure what the future lies after that. I have a few passions to go into maybe more documentary filmmaking, or to go into more linguistic related studies like translation, things like that. But right now I'm leaving it open because there's so many options to choose from. So choosing the best it just takes quite a good amount of time.
So the next step would it to apply for college or university somewhere?
I would believe that university in Europe is probably what I'm going to do. So somewhere like Sorbonne in Paris or Charles University in Prague. Those colleges have always been interesting to me, but also colleges like National University of Singapore and Taiwan, National University of Taiwan. So studying abroad has always been my envision. I've always envisioned studying abroad for college, and perhaps in another language too. And I think that wherever I get accepted, that I prefer the most, I'll probably go there for the 3 or 4 years that it takes to study.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to look forward to, and what an amazing experience that would be, with so much other stuff happening on the way. TJ, thanks a lot for taking the time to tell us all about your enthusiasm for languages, for travel, your multicultural background, and to talk about how you make your films and your plans for the future. And it just remains for me really to wish you the best of luck as these plans develop. And I'm sure we'll all be watching and waiting with great interest. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, folks, for watching. As always, if you haven't done already, don't forget to subscribe to The Vibe, think about a thumbs up, tickle that bell, and share the affair. See you all soon. TJ, once again, thanks very much.
Of course, thanks for having me.